legend down on the farm. Learned about loving in a country girl's arms. Shed my
Hello everybody, I'm James Blundell and welcome to my fortnightly podcast, Down on the Farm, on the Punctured Media YouTube channel. You just click on the red button to subscribe. Down on the Farm is a very broad format that discusses the stories and the songs and the events that shape us individually and us as Australians as a culture. And I can't think of a better way to start the new year with a very special guest who will hate me for saying it, but he is absolutely a living legend. I've been fortunate enough to know him over a lot of years, not particularly well, but been enamoured and fascinated by him, as has the rest of the culture. He's ARIA Hall of Fame inductee, Songwriters Hall of Fame inductee, 16 studio albums, 42 singles, songs like Deep Water, Capricorn Dancer, Blue Bay Blues. Man, love this guy, as do we all. It's my very great pleasure to welcome to Down on the Farm, Richard Clapton. G'day, mate.
Hi, James. How are you?
Dead dangerous. And I think that's something we've both probably subscribed to as a way of life for a long time. I can't tell you, and I was saying to you just prior to going to air that it's actually in honour of your adherence to staying real across 50 years of music that normally for these I wind up, having a shave and sort of getting all ready to be on air. We're in the middle of a round of mustering and drenching and preparing sheep for sale up on the property, and I thought, he'll get the fact that I've just turned up straight out of the yards and probably need a wash, but you can't smell me, so it doesn't matter.
No, I love it.
And one of these days, I've been hoping to write with you for 20-odd years, and we got very close one time, and one day up here, I'd just love to have you up and have a look, because there's such different worlds,
Yeah.
There was one other thing I wanted to tell you that I think none of us take compliments well, but I think from a performer and writer's point of view, this is probably the greatest one that you can have. I was travelling with my son, who's now 23. I've got 4 beautiful kids, and he was just getting his Spotify playlist together. Mm. And he looked at me completely artlessly one day in the middle of nowhere and he said, "Have you ever heard of a bloke called Richard Clapton?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "He's really fucking good." I said, "Yeah, well," but this is a 19-year-old kid who had started. The first song of yours he heard was Deep Water. And that led him, as a 19-year-old, discovering your music. And as a fellow artist, I got teary. I said, that's really, if you can influence or rather be involved in that beautiful enlightenment or entertainment of multiple generations, you've won hands down already, and the rest of them, the awards and all the bits and pieces that go with it don't count. But when did you start? What was the first song? It doesn't have to be recorded, but what's the first thing you stood back from as a teenager or a 10-year-old or whatever it is and thought, I think I've got something going on here?
That would be It's All Over Now, Baby Blue. And I would have been about 15. My best friend from school, I was over at his place, and he had an older brother. There was 4 brothers, and the eldest had been in Brussels in Belgium and returned with 6 albums by this guy, Bob Dylan. Now, prior to that, I had been into Smokey Robinson, Marvin Gaye, and all those great black singers of the 60s. And anyway, so the older brother, well, first of all, he gave us both a nip of scotch. We were only 15, so that worked pretty well.
Can't go wrong.
Can't go wrong. And then he started hammering us with this Bob Dylan guy. And when you're coming out of Smokey Robinson into Bob Dylan, it's like, oh, Jesus, what the hell? And
first of all, I can't sing.
I know. And so, but anyway, look, I think we're on to our second or third nip of scotch. And it was about, 1 o'clock in the morning, and I just had this epiphany because It's All Over Now, Baby Blue came on, and the skies opened up and a brilliant shaft of light came down from the heavens, and I just went, I want to be that guy.
Where were you? In Sydney?
In Sydney, yeah.
Well, look, some of this is stapled into national folklore, but you were born in Sydney? Is that home?
Yeah. I was born in Sydney, had a pretty troubled childhood, which is why I don't talk about it much. But suffice it to say, my father put me into a boarding school and we just didn't get on. So I had a lot of family problems. So as soon as I was able, I hightailed it to London. And if you read the first chapter in my book, when Ross and I were, by this time, about 16, we actually managed to get into the Rolling Stones Hotel on their first tour. And the security was so tight and everything, but they didn't stop us. And we ended up sitting there talking to Brian Jones and Keith Richard. And I was getting on really well with Keith. And he went to Dartford Art School. So he also wanted to be an artist before he wanted to be a musician. Anyway, I had this great conversation with him. I'd done a drawing of him, which he was really impressed by. And he said, "Oh, mate, you really got to go to St Martin's in the Field. It's the best school in the world." So that's what I did. I headed off to London to go to St Martin's in the Field. But by this time, Neil Young had done After the Gold Rush, Joni Mitchell had done Blue, and I was getting sucked in more and more. I actually got to the point in London, because I was in London for 4.5 years, and I managed to, I think I was the highest paid 18 and 19-year-old graphic designer in London at the time. But by this time, I'd been answering ads in Melody Maker and putting bands together and stuff like that. And I just drifted further and further away from art and into music. And there you go.
It's one of the key questions. I love London, and there's a couple of things. I really wish I'd been where you were. So you were late teens in the 60s in London.
Yeah.
Has anything ever been that exciting since? I mean, that really, even more than the West Coast of America at that stage of the game, where everything was happening. That was ground zero for the excitement.
I used to make Michael Hutchence jealous when I'd tell him what gigs I'd seen in London.
Yeah. Well, you're doing it already here. So.
Yeah. But even though I love those British bands and, especially the Stones, the Kinks, etc., at home I was listening to, one of my favourite stories is, so they used to have a record player back in my day, son. The record would drop down, had this little handle and it would drop down.
That's right, yeah.
Now, I've always been not a poor sleeper. I find it hard to get to sleep. So I was so enamoured with Dylan. I mean, I was obsessed with Dylan, quite frankly. And his album, Blonde on Blonde, is side 1, side 2, but Sad Eyed Lady in the Lowlands is so long. I think it's 16 minutes long. So it took up a whole record of its own. And honestly, for about 2 years, I'm living in this little bed set in London with my girlfriend. And for me to get to sleep, I just have to put Blonde on Blonde in every night. And by the time Sad Eyed Lady...
Good to go.
Yeah, off I'd go.
We've both grown up in an era where you solicited attention with music by articulating your generation's thought process. I mean, it's been said about Dylan, it's been said about you a lot. Is the thing I love in reading the parts of your background I wasn't aware of is that it's, that's a 50-year career, and you are absolutely regarded as a seminal part of the structure of the Australian psyche. That's a hell of a compliment. How do you cope with that?
Well, I never really thought about it. I think that description of me really first started occurring when I did In Excess. So, as you just said, let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. But that's when people who are flattering me were calling me the Godfather of Rock. Other people were calling me the Grandfather of Rock.
Such a fine line.
But that's because, that little rat pack with Cold Chisel and In Excess and me and, Running Wild and stuff like that. So I obviously over the years, I think even since Prussian Blue, my first album in 1973, I've been pretty blessed with getting a lot of really good reviews. Not so much money, but really good reviews. If I had $1 for every bit of good I've had, I'd be a effing millionaire. But,
so true. Again, you bring up you go.
It's really nice. And look, I'm not going to digress, but I find situations like this really interesting. I did an anthology with, Don Bartley, the mastering guy. And
sure, know him very well.
Yeah. And anyway, that was at EMI Studios in Castlereagh Street, Sydney, and, Grand Ole Studio. Anyway, Don was playing all my tracks because it was like a double CD set. And there were all these young kids, for your viewers, I know you know it, James, but, they had about 6 mastering suites. And so there were all these young alternative indie kids in the other mastering suites. And anyway, I came outside to get a coffee. And all these young guys are going, man, said you? Jesus, man, I don't believe it. Because they'd heard me doing Glory Road and songs like that, or I'm an Island, but they just couldn't, I don't know, they couldn't put the face to the music. Anyway, they were kind of blown out about my body of work. Because obviously because it's an anthology, it's like Get Back to the Shelter, all of that stuff. But then the other thing is the way these kids grilled me about Deepwater and the Goodbye Tiger album, the sound of it. And I tried to explain to them that Richard Batchens was the producer and Richard was a really hard taskmaster, which I'm glad of, by the way. I used to have to tune. There was no tuners. I had to tune up to a piano in Festival Studios, and it had to be precise. Otherwise, he would whoop my ass, if I had one string slightly out of tune. But anyway, these kids would go, man, how do you get that sound? And I go, well, kids, if you've got a couple of hours, I'll try and explain it. First of all, you have a collection of really old, almost pre-war Neumann microphones. Then you have a studio like Festival Studios. When was that built, James? The 50s, 1950s?
I was going to say, yeah, that's right.
I think 1950s. Then you get the Neve console. They had the first 24 track. Anyway, it's just that you need all these components and they're all sort of catalysts. I don't know. But the most important thing is I told them the drummer would be baffled off, would be in that big room. I know James knows the studio, but I'll explain to the viewers. It's it's a fairly large studio. The drummer would be over in a corner behind baffle boards. The other 6 of us would be out in the studio, all playing together. And the thing is, the sound of the instruments, it would all bleed into it, Then you'd have this tape, Ampex 456, which was like the most beautiful tape because it had this natural compression. That's what made that analog sound. But anyway, I'm raving on and on and on, probably getting boring. But it's just the way kids nowadays go, geez, man, that's unbelievable. We wish we could do that. I go, well, kids, sorry, you'll never be able to get that sound again. Those days are gone.
What was your first guitar? What was the first piece you picked up and thought, I've just got to wrap myself around this forever and a day?
It was, I think it was called a Harmony. And my guitar player, Danny Spencer, who's half my age, and I've had Danny for about 20, 23 years now. And Danny recently bought the same Harmony. He found it in a pawn shop on the Gold Coast, I think. And he's so proud of it. I go, Danny, kid, I bought one of those like 55 years ago. Well, damn.
Cost me 25 quid.
Yeah.
Another thing that came up, and it just, again, I first got to Sydney in 1985, Curtis. I was going to spend my life in the bush with cattle. Music was always part of it. I've been writing since I was 7, playing since I was 4, for no other reason than pure love of it. And as has been the case with you, that undiluted passion that's never gone away has saved our lives. It keeps you alive when things aren't going well. It reminds you why we do what we do. But I had Sydney in 1985, 1986. You could not walk into a pub that didn't have at least a duo or a 3-piece. It was Thursday, Friday, Saturday, bands in every pub. I just missed I got to Sydney just after Chisel had done The Last Stand. But you were back home and living in Sydney while that period of time, which was Midnight Oil, In Excess, Chisel. That must have been an amazing period of time to have been at your position in that, rather than being an enamoured patron or a young artist trying to make it, because you were really well established at that stage of the game, which takes us, I suppose, to the first time you saw In Excess, that would have been in a pub, I'm assuming.
Mm-hmm. It was, and I recently put an old poster that a fan sent me because, and it's a poster that's got Richard Clapton, a special guest In Excess down the bottom. But truly, there's about 80 gigs. We toured our butts off for 3 months. It was 80 gigs we did, something like that. It's on my Facebook page. The list of gigs is extraordinary. We really, all bands, well, you know, any band worth its salt would work between 4 and 6 times a week. I could do that. I could work 5 or 6 nights a week in Sydney and never have to leave Sydney. There was so many venues. Anyway, I was still going back to Europe a lot because I still had a lot of English and German friends. And so I used to go back there actually for a bit of a break from festival records and the music industry here. Anyway, but this time I've been away for about eight or 9 months in Berlin. And I came back and there was only one stopover. I was really dog-tired. Murphy called me up and Chris had a very acerbic, abrasive personality and I loved him. Acquired taste, yeah. And he wanted
very much so. Very much so.
He wanted me to come down and see this new band he'd signed up while I'd been away. And I said, oh, man, I'm jet lagged and everything. You know, can we talk tomorrow? And he went, no, they're playing the Paddington Green. I want you to come down. You know, Paddington Green's a pub, of course, in Paddington in Sydney. And I was like, oh, man, I'm too tired. I really didn't want to. Then he started describing it to me. And I'll never forget. I said, oh, geez, you can't be serious. What is it, flock of seagulls? You know, it's like, bugger off. I want to go to sleep. But as I said, he was a very bombastic sort of character. So I don't know how he coerced me to come down to the Paddington Green Hotel. I got there about 11 p.m. The band was going on at 1 a.m., which is the way gigs used to be then. And truly, I walked into this pub. There was Chris Murphy and there was 9 middle-aged drunks who couldn't get a beer anywhere after midnight. So they'd just come. No one else. There was no one. Now, by this stage, I'd been a professional musician for, 12, 15 years. And, you know, if you're playing to no one, it's like, well, fellas, you know, short set's a good set. You play 4 or 5 songs and go home.
Chinatown's still open. You get a meal.
These guys came on and played with this passion and panache. I was just gobsmacked. And they played a really long set. It was longer than an hour and a half. There's no one in the room. And it's just me. I'm just standing there going, Jesus. Because, you know, I had this preconceived idea they sounded like one of those, you know, British hairdresser bands. You know, as you can understand, it was an easy mistake to make because anyway, I went backstage and I was just raving with these guys and I just said, oh, mate, you guys are so awesome. And, you know, at this stage, I've got to admit, I was a bit of an old fuddy-duddy. I was trying to chase Brett Jackson Brown, and that's all I was interested in. I wanted to be that guy. So I didn't have a very broad listening experience. Anyway, so we hit it off so well that night. I think we stayed drinking till dawn, and they wanted to do the Love One, and they asked, and they were raving because my album Dark Spaces I had produced myself. That was the first album I had produced myself. They loved the sound of it, and they loved certain musical attitudes that I had, and they wanted a piece of that. So anyway, we went and did the Love One. I think we got into the top 10. It did pretty well. So then
fantastic.
It was just a natural progression. And then so everyone said, well, you know, can you do our album, our second album? That's where it all started.
Rest is history, you know.
Yeah.
And but you know, those bands, yourself and those bands, I still get very nostalgic because that was Australia punched so far above its weight on the national scene during that period of time because back to what we were talking about, everybody cut their teeth on 4 or 5 nights of work a week. And if you weren't good, you got heckled. And Australian heckling is different to any other heckling anywhere else in the world, you know. So, and I reckon you've probably lived through more. What's the What's the closest? Well, I mean, there are several famous stories. What's the closest you've ever come to just telling someone in the crowd that, you know, any more mate near and drunk?
Well, I assume I can use any expletives I wish. In
Sure
this
can.
call, is this correct? And you've heard of Michael Chugg, have you not?
Yeah.
Okay. Prior to Michael Chugg taking up my management, I had been a very shy, very sensitive little flower of poetic. I just wanted to be a serious singer-songwriter. And I was doing the Bondi Lifesaver, and the Goodbye Tiger album had already gone gold. So I was sort of flavour of the month. So we had a packed house at the Lifesaver. It was the first gig of mine that Chuggy had come to. He'd been managing me for, 2 or 3 months prior to this. Anyway, I went on at the Lifesaver about midnight, as you did, 11 p.m. midnight or something. And, oh, hello, ladies and gentlemen. And here's a song of mine. It's sort of an existential experience. And the drunks, the Lifesaver going, oh, fuck off. And Chuggy's getting drunker and drunker standing in the wings. And he goes, you idiot, you're dying in the ass. Get on to get fucked. I went, oh, Michael, I can't say that. And he dragged me over, and he was drinking out of a bottle of Courvoisier cognac. And he's tipping cognac down my throat and going, get out there and, kick him in the ass, blah, blah, blah. And so I went back out, and after about 6 weeks of this cognac, truly, I hadn't been going down all that well in the first, 6 or 7 songs. And then the alcohol took over. Some smart ass in the audience said something to me. I went, oh, go fuck yourself, motherfucker. And the whole crowd broke up. And then Ralph was born. And this is me, the famous, legendary Ralph, the party animal. Welcome to the party that never ends. Ralph, the sex god. Hey, mate, it got me through. Got me through 50 years, because I'm telling you, they don't like shrinking violence in Australia. No.
Richard, thank you so much. Always been an unashamed fan, as you know, but I've always also known that there's a big mind at work behind all that machinery and all that work, and real privilege. And thank you. Viewers, you'd understand, Richard, it's a big story. We're doing this interview in 2 episodes. So thank you to our sponsors for this episode, Aussie Legends Hemp, stylish Outback Clothing, and the Granite Belt Brewery. And I'll see you all for the next episode of Down on the Farm on Punctured Media's YouTube channel. Click the red button to subscribe.
Down